Before I start, I need to warn you. This video is going to be one of the most disturbing things I've ever covered on this channel. Not because I'm going to be reckless with it, but because the truth of what Ted Bundy did and how he did it is genuinely hard to sit with. This is a real biography, real victims, real families who are still alive today. So I'm going to tell you everything: who he was, how he hunted, what he did, and how he was finally stopped. But I'm going to tell it with the respect these victims deserve. If you're ready for the full story, let's go back to the beginning. November 24th, 1946, Burlington, Vermont. A baby boy is born to a 22-year-old woman named Eleanor Louise Cowell. She's unmarried. The father, to this day, has never been officially confirmed. Some investigators later believed it may have been Louise's own abusive father. That was never proven. But it tells you something about the environment this child entered the world in. Because of the social shame of being an unwed mother in 1940s America, Louise's parents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell, made a decision. They would raise the baby as their own. The child would be told that his grandparents were his parents, and that his own mother, the woman who gave birth to him, was his older sister. That baby was Theodore Robert Cowell. The world would later know him as Ted Bundy. Think about what that does to a child. Your entire identity, who you are, where you come from, who loves you, built on a lie. And the people who were supposed to protect you decided that their reputation mattered more than your truth. His grandfather, Samuel Cowell, was by multiple accounts a violent, tyrannical man. Neighbors and family members described him as someone with an explosive temper who abused animals and intimidated everyone around him. Young Ted, by some accounts, idolized him, which tells you something about what strength looked like in that household. There were signs early. A relative recalled waking up one morning to find the young Ted, around 3 years old, arranging kitchen knives around her sleeping body. He stood there, watching her, smiling. 3 years old. When his mother eventually moved them to Tacoma, Washington, and married a man named Johnny Bundy, Ted took his stepfather's last name. On the surface, a fresh start. But Ted never connected with his stepfather. He felt superior to him, embarrassed by him even. He was quiet about it, controlled, but the contempt was there. In school, Ted was brilliant and socially skilled on the surface, but classmates described something slightly off about him. He didn't understand jokes intuitively. He studied how people interacted and then imitated it, rather than feeling it naturally. Social behavior, for Ted Bundy, was always a performance. As a teenager, he discovered something about himself that he would carry into adulthood. He liked to watch. He would wander neighborhoods at night, peering through windows into people's private lives. He later described it himself, how it started as curiosity and evolved into something he needed. Something that eventually wasn't enough on its own. By his early 20s, Ted Bundy was a walking contradiction. On the outside, a promising, handsome, politically connected law student with a bright future. A man who volunteered at a suicide crisis hotline and was described by colleagues as one of the most empathetic listeners they'd ever met. On the inside, something was building that had no name yet. Criminologists and investigators have debated for decades when Ted Bundy's crimes actually began. Bundy himself gave contradictory answers. What we know for certain starts in 1974. But Bundy hinted, in his final confessions, that it may have started much earlier, possibly as far back as his teenage years. The first confirmed murder attributed to Bundy is that of Linda Ann Healy, January 31st, 1974. She was 21 years old, a psychology student at the University of Washington. She did weather reports for a local radio station. She had roommates who loved her. She had a life. She went to sleep one night in her basement bedroom near campus, and she was gone. Her roommates assumed she'd left early. It took days before anyone realized something was wrong. When they finally checked her room, they found her bedsheets, soaked in blood at the head of the bed, her nightgown neatly folded at the foot. Ted Bundy had entered her home while she slept. He had bludgeoned her into unconsciousness, and he had taken her. Linda Healy was never found alive. Her skull was later discovered on a remote mountain, along with remains of other victims. Here is how Bundy selected and approached his victims, because understanding this is understanding why he was so hard to catch. He had a type. Most of his known victims were young women, college-aged, with long, dark hair, often parted in the middle. Some investigators believe this resembled a woman who had rejected him in a serious relationship years earlier. A woman named Stephanie Brooks, who broke up with him in 1968 because she felt he lacked ambition and direction. That rejection, by most psychological accounts, never left him. He used props and performances. He would wear a fake arm cast or walk on crutches. He would approach women in broad daylight, in public spaces, asking for help, carrying books to his car, needing assistance with a sailboat. When women got close to his Volkswagen Beetle, the dynamic shifted. He was physically powerful and had the element of complete surprise. He used false authority. In some cases, he posed as a police officer or a fire marshal, approaching women with official-sounding pretexts. He targeted transitional moments. Women walking alone between buildings on campus. Women leaving a bar. Women in parking garages. The moments between safety and safety. That's where he struck. He didn't just grab people. He convinced them to come with him. That was the most disturbing part. He removed the violence long enough to get compliance, and then everything changed. His method of killing was strangulation and blunt force trauma. He would assault victims from behind when their guard finally dropped. He would bind them. In many cases, investigators found evidence that after his victims had died, Bundy returned to the sites where he had left them, sometimes days later. He had what psychologists call a necrophilic fixation. He interacted with his victims after death. I'm telling you this not for shock value, but because it's what distinguished Bundy from other killers of his era. He didn't just want to take lives. He wanted complete control over another human being. And that desire extended beyond any boundary most of us can comprehend. It's disturbing. It's supposed to be. Between January and July of 1974, at least 7 women disappeared from Washington and Oregon. Donna Manson, 19 years old, March 12, 1974, left her dormitory at Evergreen State College to walk to a jazz concert on campus. Never arrived. Susan Rancourt, 18 years old, April 17, 1974, Central Washington State College, disappeared on her way to a film study session. Several women on campus that same night reported a man with his arm in a sling, asking for help carrying books to his car. Roberta Parks, 20 years old, May 6th, Oregon State University, walked out of her dorm to get some air. Gone. Brenda Ball, 22 years old, last seen at a tavern near Seattle-Tacoma Airport, vanished. Georgianne Hawkins, 18 years old, June 11th, University of Washington. She walked down a well-lit alley between her boyfriend's fraternity house and her sorority, a path she had walked dozens of times. Witnesses saw a man on crutches carrying a briefcase near the alley that night. Georgianne was never seen alive again. Each one of these women was a person. She had a favorite song. She had people who called to check on her. She had plans for the summer. I want you to remember that as I keep going. July 14, 1974, Lake Sammamish State Park, Washington. A warm Sunday. Hundreds of people out enjoying the sun. And in the middle of all those people, in broad daylight, Ted Bundy approached multiple women, introducing himself as Ted, with his arm in a sling, asking for help with a sailboat. Most women declined and walked away. At least 2 didn't. Janice Ott, 23 years old. She was seen leaving the beach with a man matching Bundy's description. Witnesses heard her agreeing to help him. Denise Nasland, 19 years old. She disappeared from the park hours later. Same man, same sling. Both women were taken in the same day, from a park full of people. When investigators later spoke to the dozens of witnesses from Lake Sammamish, people who had spoken to this Ted, they compiled a sketch. Charming, good-looking, arm in a sling, Volkswagen Beetle. The name Ted started circulating in police reports. For a while, that was all they had. A first name, a car, and a growing list of missing women. In the fall of 1974, Bundy relocated to Salt Lake City, Utah, enrolled in law school at the University of Utah, made friends, dated, had dinners, and the disappearances followed him like a shadow. Nancy Wilcox, 16 years old, October 2nd, 1974, Holiday, Utah. Melissa Smith, 17 years old, October 18th, Midvale, Utah. Daughter of the local police chief. She was found 9 days later in the mountains. She had been strangled. Evidence suggested she had been held alive for days before she died. Laura Amy, 17 years old, Halloween night, 1974. She was found on Thanksgiving Day in a canyon. She had been beaten with a crowbar. Carol DeRanche, 18 years old, November 8th, 1974, Murray, Utah. Carol DeRanche is one of the most important names in this entire story. Because Carol survived. A man approached her in a shopping mall, identifying himself as Officer Roseland from the Murray Police Department. He told her someone had attempted to break into her car and asked her to come with him to file a report. He was polite, official seeming. She got into his car. Within minutes, he had snapped a handcuff onto her wrist. Carol screamed, fought. When he raised a crowbar to hit her, she threw herself out of the moving vehicle onto the road. She survived. She reported everything to real police. She described the car, a light-colored VW Beetle. She described the man. And later, when she was shown a lineup, she pointed directly at Ted Bundy. Carol DeRanche's testimony would eventually help put him away. That same night Carol escaped, another woman, Debbie Kent, 17 years old, disappeared from a high school play in Bountiful, Utah. Her remains weren't found for years. From Utah, Bundy drove into Colorado. More women vanished. Karen Campbell, Julie Cunningham, Denise Oliverson, Shelley Robertson, Nancy Baird. The map of his crimes was expanding, and still no arrest. August 16th, 1975, 2:30 a.m., Granger, Utah. Sergeant Bob Hayward of the Utah Highway Patrol is parked in his neighborhood when he notices a Volkswagen Beetle rolling through without its headlights. It speeds off when it sees his cruiser. Hayward follows, pulls him over. The driver is calm, almost theatrically calm. He says he's coming from a drive-in movie. He's friendly, cooperative. Then Hayward shines his flashlight inside the car. No passenger seat. It's been removed. On the floor, a ski mask, a second mask made from pantyhose, handcuffs, rope, a crowbar, an ice pick, torn strips of sheet. Bundy is arrested on suspicion of burglary. When Carol DeRanche was brought in and shown a lineup, she picked him immediately. Certain. He was charged. Convicted of aggravated kidnapping in 1976. Sentenced to 15 years. The detective working the Colorado murder cases, Mike Fisher, was building a parallel case. The evidence was slowly, painstakingly coming together. Bundy was extradited to Colorado to stand trial for the murder of Karen Campbell. And that's when he decided he wasn't going to wait around for a verdict. June 7th, 1977, Pitkin County Courthouse, Aspen, Colorado. Bundy is representing himself, giving him access to the courthouse law library. A guard steps away briefly. Bundy walks to the second-floor window and jumps. He sprains his ankle. He has no money, no car, no plan. He's in the Rocky Mountains, but he's free. He breaks into a cabin, steals food, clothes, a car. He makes it to Aspen, walks around town, sits in a restaurant, orders food. For 8 days, he's loose in Colorado. They catch him when a sheriff's deputy notices him driving erratically. Exhausted, half-starved, he's back in custody. He spends the next 6 months in his cell, and he is not idle. He obtains a hacksaw blade. He is fed intentionally smaller amounts of food, dropping over 30 pounds, specifically so he can fit through a small hole. Every night, he works on the ceiling of his cell. December 30th, 1977. He squeezes through the hole, crawls across the ceiling, drops into the jailer's apartment, which is empty for the holidays. He puts on civilian clothes from the closet. He walks out the front door. By the time guards do a head count the next morning, Ted Bundy has a 15-hour head start. He steals cars, takes a bus, makes it to Chicago by train, then to Ann Arbor, Michigan, then down to Atlanta by bus, and finally to Tallahassee, Florida, where he rents a room near Florida State University under the name Chris Hagen. For the first few weeks, he shoplifts food, goes to the movies, walks around campus, watches people. And then, the darkness he'd been holding back came rushing out. January 15th, 1978. 2:45 a.m., Tallahassee, Florida. The Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. While the residents slept, Ted Bundy entered through an unlocked back door. In the space of approximately 15 minutes, he attacked 4 women in their rooms. Margaret Bowman, 21 years old, strangled with a nylon stocking, killed. Lisa Levy, 20 years old, strangled and beaten, killed. The medical examiner found human bite marks on her body, evidence that would later be used directly against Bundy in court. Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner were both beaten severely with a log. Both survived, but with serious injuries. That same night, Bundy attacked a 5th woman, Cheryl Thomas, at a house just blocks away. She survived, but suffered permanent hearing loss and balance damage from her injuries. 5 women, 1 night. And he was gone before anyone knew he'd been there. On February 9th, 1978, just weeks later, in Lake City, Florida, he abducted Kimberly Leach, 12 years old, from her junior high school during school hours. Kimberly Leach was the youngest confirmed victim. Her remains were found in a state park weeks later. February 15th, 1978, Pensacola, Florida, 1 a.m. Officer David Lee spots a VW Beetle driving erratically. Plates come back stolen. He pulls it over. The driver runs. Lee chases him on foot, tackles him to the ground. At the station, the man gives a false name. Then he goes quiet. Then he says, "I'm Ted Bundy." He had been free for 46 days. The trial of Ted Bundy was a spectacle unlike anything America had seen. It was one of the first trials ever televised nationally. Women, inexplicably, sent him fan mail, called him handsome, proposed marriage. The phenomenon confused investigators and psychologists alike. It was a dark reflection of how completely Bundy had understood the power of appearance. He represented himself, again. He cross-examined witnesses. He smiled at the jury. He seemed, at moments, to genuinely believe he could win. The bite mark evidence was decisive. A forensic odontologist matched the marks found on Lisa Levy's body directly to Ted Bundy's teeth. It was one of the first high-profile uses of bite mark forensics in American history. On July 23, 1979, guilty on all counts, death sentence. For the next decade on death row, he played his final game. He strung along investigators with partial confessions, offering details of crimes in exchange for delays of his execution. Detectives flew in from across the country to sit across from him, knowing he was manipulating them, doing it anyway, because somewhere, a family was still waiting to find out what happened to their daughter. He confessed to the murders of women in Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. He described, in clinical detail, how he had selected victims, how he had approached them, what he had done. He admitted to returning to dump sites and interacting with the remains of his victims, sometimes for extended periods. He admitted this without remorse, almost analytically. January 24, 1989, his final morning. In his last interview, he told psychologist James Dobson that he blamed violent pornography for his crimes, a statement most criminologists rejected as a last-ditch attempt to control the narrative, to be remembered as a cautionary tale rather than simply a monster. At 7:06 a.m., Ted Bundy was strapped into the electric chair at Florida State Prison. At 7:16 a.m., he was pronounced dead. Outside the prison walls, a crowd had gathered. Some estimates say over 2,000 people. They cheered, set off fireworks, held signs. Someone had written, "Burn, Bundy, burn." He was 42 years old. He confessed to 30 murders across 7 states. Most investigators believe the true number was significantly higher. Some estimates go as high as 100. We will likely never know the full count, because Ted Bundy took that answer with him. 30 confirmed victims. Dozens of families who spent years not knowing. Women who escaped him and spent the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. Carol DeRange, the woman who jumped out of that moving car, testified against him. She had to sit in the same room as the man who tried to kill her and pointed him in front of a jury. She did it, and her testimony mattered. The Lake Sammamish witnesses who gave police a first name and a description, they mattered. Sergeant Bob Hayward, who thought a car without headlights was worth a closer look at 2:30 in the morning, he mattered. Ted Bundy wanted to be the smartest person in any room, and for years he was. But he wasn't smarter than all of them together. That's the thing about cases like this. They don't end because of one hero. They end because dozens of ordinary people paid attention, trusted their instincts, did their jobs with care. The women he targeted were not naive. They were not careless. They were human beings living their lives, who encountered a man who had spent years perfecting how to seem completely safe. Remember their names before you remember his. Linda Healy, Donna Manson, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks, Brenda Ball, Georgianne Hawkins, Janice Ott, Denise Nasland, Nancy Wilcox, Melissa Smith, Laura Amy, Debbie Kent, Karen Campbell, Julie Cunningham, Denise Oliverson, Shelley Robertson, Nancy Baird, Margaret Bowman, Lisa Levy, Kimberly Leach, and all the others whose names we may never know. Those are the people this story is actually about. Thank you for watching. If this meant something to you, leave a comment, share it. Subscribe if you want more stories told this way, with the full truth and the respect it deserves. I'll see you in the next one.